Welcome, welcome, Judy Kass, to the People's Voice Cafe interview series, otherwise known as PVC NYC TV. It's a name we just made up, because we had no better brand, So it's a pleasure to meet you and to get the opportunities to speak with you. I did already have the pleasure of speaking with Michael Veitch, with whom you've done work, and that was a great conversation. But I'm really looking forward to getting to know you, and I'm looking forward to hearing this show coming up on November 4th at the People's Voice Cafe in New York City. For all those folks who may not already know that, that's when we're doing this. And I'd like to start by just asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself. Where were you born? Where were you raised? How did music suck you in? That kind of thing.
Okay. I was born in Brooklyn.
Yay!
Yay! Actually, my family lived in the same building that Freddie Hubbard lived in all those years back.
Oh, and what building was that?
That was 919 Park Place.
So you were in Crown Heights.
Yes, but we quickly moved out. I was very young when we moved to Rockland County. I'm one of three kids. Both parents are musicians. My dad was a musician. They played string and piano, and that's what we all grew up learning. And we couldn't tell whether we were talking or singing in our house, because
Nice.
very often the conversation would end up in sing banter back and forth. So to your question of when did music soak me in, yes, almost from day one.
Very cool. Very cool. It's it's a blessing to be in a musical family. I too was one of three. My mother was my piano teacher, and my brothers and I each play a stringed instrument, because my mother's dream was for us to play Mozart piano quartets together.
Yes, that was my parents' dream too.
Right, which would have been fine if my mother could have played the piano well enough to play the piano part, but she was valiant in her efforts to do that.
Well, good for her.
Yes,
good
exactly.
aspirations.
So when you were in school, and I assume you went to high school locally, where'd you go to college?
I went to college both locally in Westchester and then in New York City, actually a little bit in Europe too. I was educated as, I got a degree in psychology and then clinical social work. And I've had a career path less traveled, was encouraged to have a real career, as I said. Interestingly enough, growing up in a family of musicians were like, you better do something that you can pay your rent with. Not that social workers get paid so well, but we there was always an openness to pursuing music. So I became a clinical social worker. Then I took a venture into the corporate world. For a number of years. It was going to be a social experiment for me. It lasted about 21 years and made my way through in human resources, the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that was an interesting experiment. And you probably know, if you read my bio, that I worked at the World Trade Center and was not there when all that happened. But it really informed a lot of my perspective and the music I'm coming out with later. But it certainly propelled me to leave the corporate world. I did a little stint at teaching, but coming back to clinical work and then now full-time music.
So you were an LCSW?
Yes.
Oh, wow. So you did the 3,000 hours, the whole bit, the whole spaghetti?
Yes. Oh, you're familiar with it. Is that your path?
Well, we're on parallel paths, not exactly the same. I was in nonprofit. First of all, my mother told me, be a lawyer, don't be a musician, even though I wanted to be a musician. I should not have listened to her. But I've done a lot of work with nonprofits, and one of my most recent full-time job that I retired from was supervising a bureau at the Brooklyn DA's office, and I supervised mostly social workers. So that was
wow.
That was the thing.
Wow.
So, yeah, a little bit familiar, but that's great. And also my late wife worked at the World Trade Center, and so that whole experience and what our sons went through, around that, all that kind of stuff is so formative in terms of making us think about the world and want to write. So
Yep.
that's really cool. So were you writing songs all along through your life, or is that something you started
You know,
later?
I didn't write much during the corporate years. And as a matter of fact, I had written, I don't know if you listened to my song Beyond the Ash and Tears, which is
Not
the
yet.
title of my second album. But I had written that initially on guitar and couldn't play it for like 15 years because I was still working through my own grief. So I repurposed it. I repurposed it for piano and also to apply not to just the trauma I experienced, but working through any trauma. And then I was able to do it. So, but I was always doing something. For a number of years. I was doing some playing with different, vocalizing with different groups, playing with different groups, some jazz work, but not really pursuing the singer-songwriter. Didn't try to record for my own work for a number of years. It really took me leaving the corporate world, and probably around 2008 was when I started getting back into doing my thing with it. So it was a bit of a hiatus, but
wow, that's fascinating. I mean,
mhm.
I'm talking to so many people who had roots in music ever since they were born, essentially, but many of whom really didn't find their own voice until much, 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 much later as songwriters, because life teaches us and gives us material to work with.
That's right. Exactly. Fodder.
Fodder. Yeah, fodder. That's it. That's it. Fodder. Wow, that's fascinating. And do you also play the piano as well as the guitar?
I do. I was classically trained. That was my first instrument, and
Oh,
yeah. So I accompany myself, and yeah, I very often will write on piano. But most of what I have recorded has been guitar based, and then sometimes I'll lay a piano line with it. But I think with the new album I'm working on, there's going to be one piano focused piece on it.
a piano focused piece. I like
Yeah,
that.
well, meaning it's piano. It's
Yes.
The piano is the main instrument feature.
I got you. Well,
Yeah.
I too I call myself a rhythm keyboard player. I wouldn't even call myself classically trained because I rejected lessons when I was in middle school and fell in love with Elton John. So
Yeah.
I consider myself a rock and roll keyboard player, but I recently started taking lessons again for just so that I could get better at doing scales, because I can't do scales. It's just
Hannon, man, you got to get that.
That's what I got. That's what my teacher gave me. It's like I was like, I hated them when I was a kid. I hated them, but at this age, the fingers need to move, and they need to practice.
Very healthy, and you have to develop that muscle memory.
Yes, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
So, all right. So you started writing, and I gather you probably met people along the way who were either fellow writers or interested in singing your stuff. And what was that like? And who were some of the people who inspired you to move forward?
Oh my! Thank goodness we have champions. Well, you mentioned the song "Look at Us Marching Now." I had recorded the basic recording of it with Mark Dan, who
I know Mark.
You know Mark. How can you not know Mark? And he said, "This is a good song. Who'd like this? Christine Lavin. You should send it to her." And I'd met Christine very briefly. I don't know if she would have recognized me on the street if I ran into her at the time at NERFA. And I sent it to her within an hour. She shot me back an email saying, "We've got to make a video of this. I love this song." And she became a champion. I was lucky that my first CD got played, and folks like Ron Olesko and others, and and the John Plass of the world, they're wonderful folks who really help support in many ways the artists out there. So there've been great folks out there, and elders. I'm not sure the folk world is as good as the jazz world was with the whole mentoring thing. They really had that down, and that's how you learned. You would go into clubs and you'd listen to these guys, and if you were lucky, maybe after a few years, they'd ask you to sit in. It's a little different in the singer-songwriter world, but you can find your champions just going and being patient and listening a lot. So yeah, Christine Lavin, a number of them I can't even think.
Well, it's
I
interesting
don't
because
insult anyone by not mentioning.
this isn't
What
politics.
happens when you're older? Then the memory goes.
That's our excuse. Well, one of the interesting things about what you just said is that the feedback that I've received, because I don't quite consider myself a folk singer, but
Mhm.
I'm somebody who enjoys and will sing folk music. But I don't consider myself a folk songwriter. But one of the things I've heard from some of the colleagues that I've come to know in the past 40 years in folk music is that, being a singer songwriter has this wonderful blend of, oh, we're all traveling on a journey, let's share, let's support each other. But there's also a slightly competitive edge too, because there are only so many places where there are only so many places you can get heard, and there are only so many ways that your music could get out, all of which has changed a little bit now because of the
Mhm.
internet, but not a lot,
No.
as evidenced by the fact that there are still folk music charts that kind of define where people are in the, I won't say hierarchy, but in the world of folk.
Right. That, and how much is it to get on the subway? We'll get
Yeah.
yeah. And after COVID, it got even trickier because all the places that had to cancel shows while the virus was very much out there had to try to rebook who they had in there. So it's really challenging. But you can find your tribe, and that's the other thing. I found my tribe of other singer songwriters who we support one another. We have, and there are wonderful groups like that around that I really need to attend more of. The Jack Hardy songwriting group, for example, is one of them, and other collectives of musicians who will be our ears and our shoulders and our hearts, and look for opportunities to include one another in gigs if possible, and just reach out and lift all of us up. And the more of us doing that, the better. There's also a whole crop of amazingly talented young artists coming up, and it's exciting to see what they're bringing in too.
I was just talking with someone else, and we were discussing the fact that folk music, which never excluded love songs or personal songs, but didn't necessarily emphasize it, at least not in the 60s and during the civil rights movement, etc. But folk music is kind of coming back to a more personal place, because the young people who didn't live through all of that stuff, although now Trump is changing that, but the younger people, they're taking all the anxiety, they're taking all the pressure of the world, and they're expressing it through much more personal songs. Yeah. So there's still folk, there's still stories, there's still the folk music, there's still the social concern, the broader social concern, but it's being represented by lyrics and approaches that are much more personal, much more my inner trauma, my inner thoughts, etc., etc. So yes, I don't think folk music is dead. I think it's just changing.
Yep. Very exciting to see where it's going.
So where do you live now?
I live in Tarrytown, New York.
And how did you get there?
How did I get there? Oh my gosh. Well, I grew up not far from there.
Right.
Lived in a couple of different continents, and then when I married a veterinarian from Argentina, and he had to finish and get himself all credentialed here. And I wanted to get out of the city. We had come back from Argentina, where he went back to finish his degree after all the military juntas were done, and you could actually do it and stay alive. Right. But I didn't want to be in the city. It was at the point that I knew I wanted to just start a family, and this made more sense. Across the river would have been a huge commute for him going to his job into the city. So we settled in Tarrytown, and I liked it. The river towns kind of have a beat to them. They seem to have more soul to them. And I always like the cultural and other diversity dimensions in Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow. There's a large immigrant population here that just enriches the community so much. So I very much got into that.
I'm doing some work with a nonprofit now in Cold Spring, which I'd never been to before, and so I go by Tarrytown a lot. But the river towns are definitely fascinating. I need to explore them more, because they seem to be very different from place to place.
Oh yeah, they very much are. Cold Spring's great. Cold Spring's a lot. You should take the train up and just spend the day exploring.
Yeah, I will definitely do that. So, how many kids do you have?
One, a daughter, and she's a musician.
What is she doing?
Well, trumpet, classically trained, went to Manhattan School of Music, and
Nice.
is now on the road with Macklemore.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah,
fantastic. That's
yeah,
great.
yeah.
Is she also a writer too, or is she basically playing?
She's starting to really explore her writing chops. During COVID, she took the opportunity to teach herself recording and production, and was able to really keep herself afloat with that. And actually, I think she's seeing that as her way to get off the road eventually, because the road can be a bit grueling. So she lives in LA. Yeah, and that's it. We have her and a couple of critters, and that's it.
Well, you're a proud mom. I mean,
Yeah, I am.
she's actually, gone in a direction that, any parent could be proud of. Creative, being
Yeah,
true to themselves, right?
that's it.
That's what we want from our kids. I have
That's
two boys, and
Oh, you have two boys?
yes, neither of whom has gone the quote unquote professional musician route, but both of whom have strong interests in music. So I'm happy with
Excellent.
that. You know, the content of folk music, when you're approaching a song, when you're writing a song, or when you think you're going to write a song, what's your process like? I mean, are you one of those folks that starts with a couple of chords and something comes to mind, or you have a specific concept and you're like, I really want to write a song about this, or is it a piano run, or what sparks you to actually write the song, and then what keeps you going to finish the song?
All of it. I don't have like a set 1, 2, 3, 4 steps, linear process at all. Some people do. I sometimes will get a concept, and I'm thinking, I really, this is something that's resonating with me. I want to write about it. Like, look at us marching now. The Women's March happened, and that just kind of poured out. Very often, I'll just be sitting there fiddling with my guitar or at the piano, and a theme or a chorus might come through, or just a set of chords. Sometimes it's lyric first, but I don't have a defined set, and that might be something I want to aspire to. I need to be more disciplined with getting it out and getting it out quickly. At times when I've been given an assignment to work on something, like I was asked to write a song about Berta Cáceres in Honduras by a songwriter friend of mine for a project she was working on. And somehow I was able to bang that out because I knew there was a deadline. Somebody else was waiting for it. Get out of your way, Judy, and just like do it. But very often for my own stuff, I'm a little less disciplined, but I'm trying to get that in. I'm working madly to finish this next album so I can get that out while I can remember my songs.
Yes, I understand that totally. Now, speaking of your songs, let's talk about your voice. I mean, you have a beautiful voice. There, at the risk of sounding corny, there are elements of Joni Mitchell and others in your singing, which I definitely like. Were you trained at all? Have you taken lessons, or you were just blessed with this gift?
Very few voice lessons. I did have a few later in life just to learn about the instrument a little bit and taking care of it. And I had a challenge a couple of years ago. Now I guess it's a year ago. This past February was a year. I had started to develop some vocal issues a couple of years ago. Difficulty managing intonation, raspiness, and I was scared because it was like, take my leg, take my arm, but
don't take that.
Don't take that.
Right? You didn't have a note. You didn't have a node on your vocal cord.
I had a cyst on the vocal. Yeah, I mean, I saw pictures of it. It was weird. And when you understand how the vocal cords work, that they have to close to get sound, it was like, whoa. And I'll put in one plug for the NYU Glen Center, the Vocal Arts Center. They're the ones. You don't mess around. If that's what you rely on to, make your way in the world, you go for the best. And I had it removed, and thankfully, I'm knocking on every piece of wood I can manage here. It's been okay, but taking care of your voice is very, very important. So now I'm a lot more conscious about warming up before going into something, and not just, belting away and screaming for a night and then doing it again. I'm not a belter anyway, but I was singing before I was talking, pretty much. So my parents say.
Right. They all say that.
They all say
Like,
that.
oh, she was saying before she was talking.
That's
Oh,
right. That's what they say.
you always had rhythm, even when you were a baby. Of course. Well,
I
it's
know about the
interesting.
rhythm part.
My most extensive experience recording with Mark Dan
Mm.
was in June of 2020 during the pandemic, where I was recording a song, and we brought a bunch of people up to his place in Woodstock, and we stood out on the lawn, and he threw the cables out the window for the microphones and for the instruments, and everybody sat socially distanced, and we recorded the tracks to this song that I wrote about the George Floyd situation. But I had a node on my vocal cord. This was June of 2020, which I didn't have removed until July of 2020. And in the meantime, I had recorded 3 songs with a raspy, a very different voice from the voice that I normally have. I justified it by saying, well, this is my way of sounding like an old blues guy who's smoked too much, which was fine. But when I listened to the recordings now, I'm like, you know what? I need to get the voice that I really have back on those records, because as cute as that is, it ain't as good as when I can sing.
Right. So you re-recorded the vocals?
I'm sorry, say again?
You re-recorded the vocals?
I have not yet re-recorded the vocals. I will re-record the vocals. I don't own a car, and getting tuned from Woodstock, it's like one of those things where I'll get there. I don't want to do it with anybody but Mark.
Right. Yeah. No,
these songs, because he's, I worked with him on them, and so I want to, deal with that. But yeah, I want to redo the vocals. So I feel the pain, when you say, oh, my voice is doing X, Y, and Z, particularly if you have deadlines, concerts, recordings, things like that.
Yeah. Right? And there are things that I look back, I did a couple of gigs during that time in the early pandemic, and I'm like, oh man, and they're out there, but those things happen. I'm pretty philosophical about it. And, I'm just grateful that we were able to take care of it and build the voice back up. And it takes a while, you're doing those exercises, and it was funny because I wasn't allowed to talk for like a week afterwards. So I had a little whiteboard, and my husband said, "You sure a week's enough?"
Oh, we're not going there.
I had written down the phrases that I thought I might be using frequently, so I could just check them off. More ice cream, please. Don't be such a jerk.
Wait, no ice cream, no dairy, not with the
right. That's true. But it was funny. So we got through it, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I'm able to still do this. And that's still, there are people, goodness gracious, look at David Amram, for good, there are people going and doing this for years, and it's possible, and we need the full spectrum of perspectives and artists bringing their voice forward in these days. So I'm just happy to be able to continue doing it.
So how do you feel as a cultural worker out there? Your perspective on the world. Do you feel that we're entering a period where you're going to feel that you have to write more and say more through music? Or
oh yeah, it's a very scary time. It's a very sad time. I mean, the polarization is just mind-boggling, and daily there are more things like and this is happening and that's happening, and you can't rely on this anymore. So I think there's a lot that we're going to be needing to speak to. So I think I'm going to have my pencil sharpened for quite a while. There's more to write about, and there are funny things to write about. I'm writing a song about where to find places to pee in New York City. That's my because it's important.
Okay,
but
so
yeah, that has a social cultural implication, because quite frankly, if you're a person of color, perhaps not cisgender, and not with funds to look like you have the means walking into a place, you may get shooed out, whereas somebody else could walk through and pretend they have a friend in the back and walks right into the restroom. So it's a real public health issue too. Yeah, no, there are actually a few websites that will appear in this song, but yeah, no, it's interesting.
So how did you end up meeting Michael Veitch?
Michael and I were on a project together that was to partner songwriters with Holocaust survivors to help them write what they wanted to say about their stories. And it was just an amazing project through an organization, Sage Arts. And he had his partner. So at the time it was COVID, so we didn't get a chance to meet until after the project was over. But that's how we did. And then he reached out for me to do these gigs with him.
So what was that like?
Sorry, we co-wrote April Fools together.
Okay, and you're going to perform that on November?
My guess is that we probably will.
Okay.
I think our intention to do it is to do kind of a yours, mine in a few hours.
That sounds good.
Yeah, we'll probably end up swapping a few. It tends to work well that way.
So what was it like to work with a Holocaust survivor? I mean, in terms of how you had to build a relationship to get to the essence of what it is you wanted to say?
Yeah, well, my ancestry is Jewish, and I lost family in the Holocaust. So there's that very personal connection. I was paired with an amazing woman, Trudy, who was very comfortable sharing her story, and she'd been tapped and was speaking in schools and libraries just about, her experience. And the most important thing for me was to go in and really discard any ideas I had of what I wanted the song to be and how I wanted to approach it. She did not want to dwell in the camps, in a lot of the trauma. She let me touch on it with one part of the song, which was to reference Mengelé's baton, where he, because that was part of her story, where you go in this line and you go in this line and that determined your fate. And she was separated from her mother and sisters and never saw them again. And she was a teenager and was put into the line of people who could work. But I needed to really let her drive the message she wanted to deliver. And it was that I survived. I thrived. And we carry our stones through life, and some of them are pebbles and some of them are boulders, and through acceptance and with a lot of love, we're able to manage to turn some of them into gems. So that's what she wanted to convey. So it allowed me to really put aside my agenda and just go with that. It was a great exercise, and I very much value that experience.
Wow, that sounds really, really fantastic. So, is there anything you'd like to share with audiences that don't know you well that I've not touched on or wouldn't think to touch on?
Well, I also sing with a trio. I sing with two other songwriters, Glen Roethel, two award-winning songwriters, Glen Roethel and Amy Soucy, and we have a trio called Us. Large U, small s, not US, but us. Exclamation point. And it's very harmony driven, and we're doing a lot of writing together, and very excited about that. We've played at the People's Voice Cafe, and hopefully we'll be there again. So yeah, I very much like collaboration. To me, it's increasingly more joyful to be doing that.
So wonderful.
Yeah.
So, of course, as you proceed with your new album, if you find yourself in need of a male background singer or a recorder player, a cello player, as long as you have a cello, or another keyboard, let me know.
I will, Chris.
I can fake all of them, and because I'm going up and down by Tarrytown 2 times a week.
Wow. Well, stop in one day. Let me know and say hi. We'll grab a cup of coffee.
That's true. We should have dinner or whatever.
Absolutely.
That would be fine. And I want to thank you for this time. This was fun.
Thank you.
And I'm really looking forward to this show on November 4th at the People's Voice Cafe. I think it's going to be outstanding. And hopefully we will, through all the work we're doing, we'll have a full house, both in person and live stream.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Good to meet you, Chris.
You're very welcome. Have a great and wonderful day.
Okay. Take care.